Have you ever been fired by someone who never understood your true worth? I was. And not by a cold old boss or a ruthless system, but by the son of the man who hired me nearly 12 years ago. I still remember that morning vividly. I was pouring coffee in the break room when Chase, the new CEO and the owner's son, walked in. He didn't say hello, didn't ask, just said, "You're fired, effective immediately." No warning, no reason. No thank you after more than a decade with the company. But what Chase didn't know was that just a few days later, he would lose everything. And the best part? I didn't have to scream or retaliate violently. I just let him shoot himself in the foot. What do you think I did next? What city are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to know where y'all are tuning in from. I've been at Prescott & Bloom for almost 12 years. Not just as an employee who shows up and leaves on time, but as someone who has helped shape the soul of the firm. We're a small law firm based in Chicago, but don't let our size fool you. Our clients are the sharks, corporate mergers, international real estate deals, multi-million-dollar disputes. And I, Lauren Mitchell, built our client service department from scratch. Every phone call, every contract, every night I stayed up instead of being with my kids. I poured it into this. No one loved this job more than I did. My former boss, Raymond Prescott, was the first person who believed in me. A guy who could silence a boardroom with a look, but still remembered every employee's birthday. He was old-fashioned in a good way. He believed in loyalty, in internal training, in the value of people. And he believed in me. I still remember one time, after just a year on the job, he pulled me aside in the hallway and said, "I see leadership in you, Lauren. Not the title on the card, but the ability to make a real impact." That statement stuck with me for years. Under Raymond's guidance, I didn't just grow. I became part of the company's brand. Once, when a multi-million-dollar deal in Dubai nearly fell apart, I flew out, negotiated through the night, and came back with a triumphant smile. Or when a major hedge fund threatened to withdraw $10 million because of a clerical error, I went to their Manhattan office, admitted my mistake, and kept them, more firmly in place than before. So when Raymond announced his retirement, I was stunned. Not because he didn't deserve a break, but because the successor he chose was someone who had never really done anything but wear the name Prescott. His son, Chase. Chase was 29, fresh out of his MBA, with slicked back hair, a tailored suit, and the way he spoke at a TED talk. That sounded like a bright spot. But running a law firm? Prescott & Bloom was not the kind of place to test drive CEOs like startups. And yet, it happened. The transition was unusually quick. Just 2 weeks after Raymond officially stepped down, Chase took his place in the large glass office on the 20th floor. The one I had looked up to every day with reverence. The old nameplate was taken down. In its place was a shiny new one. Chase Prescott, CEO. And then, things started to change. Small things at first. My name disappeared from internal emails. The clients I had been handling were handed over to inexperienced assistants who were on Chase's radar. At our first meeting, he stood in front of the office and spoke as if he were launching a fashion brand. "We're entering a new era. There will be a shake-up. There will be a leveling up. I'm going to make this a more modern, more powerful organization." Leveling up. It sounded good, but I didn't feel leveled at all. I felt pushed aside. I tried to think positively. Maybe Chase needed time to assert himself, to step out of his father's shadow. I knew. Generational transitions are hard, but as time went on, it became clearer to me. This wasn't about growing up or reorienting. This was about a quiet overthrow. 3 weeks later, Chase called me into his office. He didn't even look at me, his eyes glued to his phone, and he gestured to the chair across from him. "Lauren, right? We need to talk." My stomach clenched. A bad feeling, I'm reviewing the departments, he said, his voice flat as if he were reading a news report. And I see that your position is duplicated. We're bringing in a new head of strategy, someone with a more digital mindset. Nothing personal, just restructuring. I stared. You're firing me? He looked up for the first time. His eyes flickered as if I'd asked him if he wanted lunch. It's a necessity. HR will walk you through the steps. You pack up by 5 the end. 12 years. Hundreds of clients. Millions in revenue. Sleepless nights. Missed birthdays. And I was kicked out like a corrupted attachment. I walked out of his office in a daze. My email was locked. My internal accounts were gone. Security stood nearby as if I were a security risk. I didn't cry. I just nodded to a few coworkers, quietly packed my things. But when the elevator doors closed and the office disappeared behind the cold glass, I sighed. And I smiled. Because Chase Prescott had made a fatal mistake. He didn't read the contract. Me? I've lived on that fine print my entire career. I began to notice that things had changed not only after I was fired, but from the first weeks of Chase's tenure as CEO, the atmosphere had changed. The meetings were no longer as clean, direct, and efficient as they had been under Raymond. Meetings were now often delayed because Chase was brainstorming with the creative department, which sounded more like he was planning a new perfume launch than running a law firm. Chase showed up with his shirt untucked, his laptop covered in memes, and a vision board full of keywords like next-gen, hypergrowth, disruption, and so on, with no one really understanding what he was disrupting. And me? I became old in Chase's eyes. He didn't say it outright, but the way his eyes swept over me during meetings, like he was looking at a piece of furniture that needed replacing, was unmistakable. At first, I was still invited to strategy meetings, but not for long. I was not informed of the meeting with the Enterprise Group client, a client I had been following since the day they first joined the company, until a young employee came running up and asked, "Sir, aren't you going to the brainstorming session with the legal department?" I was stunned. I walked into the conference room and pushed open the glass door. Chase was standing in the middle of the room, laser pointer raised, presenting the customer journey as if we were an advertising agency. No one looked at me. No one invited me in. And Chase? He glanced at me briefly, then turned back and continued as if I had never existed. That afternoon, I caught Chase in the company kitchen, just the two of us. I decided to ask him directly. "I didn't see the meeting invitation email this morning. Did something change?" He smiled. His typical California startup founder smile. Lots of teeth, little meaning. Well, maybe the secretary missed it, but that's okay. It was mainly a refresher of perspective. Nothing serious. Refresher of perspective. It sounded like he was changing the Zoom background, not removing the client's lead from the discussion. "Lauren," Chase continued, his voice light as air, "you're a pillar, no doubt. But the company is changing. We want to reach a new generation of clients, softer, younger, more tech-savvy." I looked him straight in the eye. "You think I don't understand tech?" He shrugged. "That's not true. But you know, the culture needs to change. There are people who fit the new vision. There are people who are better suited elsewhere." And that was it. No formal firing. But enough to get the point across. I was no longer part of the new Prescott and Bloom. After that day, things only got worse. Important emails stopped being CC'd to me. Younger employees were slowly swiped out of my office to join Chase's new development teams. Weekly strategy meetings. I wasn't invited. Files I used to review were now being passed to a new, strategic advisor from outside. Chase also began to hint openly at things in front of the entire office. At a monthly meeting, when I offered my opinion on how to handle a recent PR crisis, he chuckled. "Lauren has a traditional perspective." But I think we need to approach things with a little more of a Gen Z mindset these days. The room laughed. I didn't. Not because I was angry, because I knew exactly what kind of person I was dealing with. For Chase, it was all about image. It was about social media. It was about performance. He hired a branding team that specialized in rebranding senior executives. He started posting pictures of himself working late at 3 a.m. on LinkedIn. Captions like, "Success has no curfew." But behind the show, there was a leader who didn't know how to actually operate. He started deconstructing customer contracts. He demanded changes in pricing, cutting service warranties, to increase margins next quarter. I warned. I typed out a nearly 2-page email analyzing the risks. Chase replied simply, "Appreciate the concern. Let's try something new for once." I've seen too many impatient young CEOs, but none like Chase, who both underestimated the efforts of others and overestimated himself. And worst of all, there was no stopping him. Raymond had retired. The board? Some of his old friends had left. The rest were new investors Chase had brought in from his MBA connection. They were interested only in the growth he had painted on his slides. And me? I was being pushed further and further away from the heart of the company I had helped build. One day, I heard news that left me speechless. The Avalora project, the biggest deal of the year, worth $40 million, which I had been working on for 7 months, was being transferred to a completely new team by Chase, cutting me out of all communication. Before I could react, a young assistant came up to me and whispered, "Sister, I heard from marketing that Chase is going to sign the Avalora contract this week, but it seems like they haven't met you yet?" I looked at her. Silence. I knew right away. Chase was trying to take the deal away from me to score personal points. The problem was, he didn't know one very important thing. According to the terms of the contract I signed with Avalora from day one, there was a special clause added by Raymond himself last year. The legal representative of Prescott and Bloom in all commercial negotiations with Avalora Inc. must be Lauren Mitchell, or a person directly authorized by her, confirmed in writing. Without me, all of Chase's signatures were null and void. And from there, I knew. The time to strike back was near. I arrived at the office on a Monday morning like any other. Outside the window, the Chicago sky was still cold and gray, signaling an approaching light rain. I had just poured myself a cup of coffee and was about to open my laptop when the desk phone rang. The voice of Chase's assistant on the other end of the line was mechanical and emotionless. "The CEO wants to see you in the executive room. Immediately." No reason, no meeting scheduled. I put down my coffee. My heart was racing, but I stood up, adjusted my jacket, and walked toward the glass office on the 21st floor. The door opened. Chase was sitting cross-legged in his swivel chair, his face glued to his phone screen. He didn't look up, didn't say hello. He just raised his hand, pointed to the chair across from him. I sat down. He typed something, then finally looked at me. His eyes were icy. "I'll get straight to the point," Chase said, his voice neither high nor low, but enough to freeze the room. "I need people who can adapt, Lauren. People who aren't stuck in the old ways. You're part of a previous era. And I think it's time for you to go." I wasn't sure if I'd heard right. "You're firing me?" "Not firing. Restructuring effective immediately." He didn't even bother to explain. No specific reasons, no performance references, no mistakes to point out. I looked straight into Chase's eyes, trying to read whether there was genuine confidence in them, or just a boy wearing a mask of maturity. I felt empty. No pain, no anger, just a blank space. I stood up, nodded slightly. Understood. Then turned and walked out. I passed the row of desks where I had led a team of more than 10 people. They stood up, their eyes bewildered, wanting to ask something. I just shook my head, smiled. No need for more confusion. No need for tears. I returned to my desk. While I was packing my personal belongings, a young IT staff came, bowed, and apologized for having to revoke my card and lock my account immediately. The whole process took less than 15 minutes. A person who had been with me for 12 years, removed from the system as if he had never existed. I stepped into the elevator. The door closed, and I exhaled. Long, slow. Then smiled. Because Chase Prescott had made a serious mistake. He thought he had just cleared away some of the old trash to make way for modern thinking. He thought a cold sentence could erase 12 years of contributions. But Chase didn't know that I was more than just a salaried employee. I was also the sole holder of the Avalora contract, a $40 million deal that was due to be signed this week. I returned to my small apartment in the north of the city. Normally, I would have called my mother, told her everything, then put my head on the pillow and let myself collapse into a rainy afternoon. But not this time. I put my laptop on the table. I opened my personal documents folder. I went to my personal copy of the Avalora Bilateral Cooperation Agreement, the one Raymond and I had scrutinized down to every comma. And as I remembered, Item 18.3 stated, "All negotiations and final confirmation of the commercial contract between Avalora Inc. and Prescott and Bloom LLP will be handled by Lauren Mitchell, Head of Client Services. Any transaction without confirmation from Ms. Mitchell will be considered invalid." That was Raymond's legacy. He had once told me, "Avalora is very meticulous. They want a single person to be with them throughout the negotiation process to ensure continuity. I trust you, Lauren, so I'm putting your name on the contract." Now I understood that was Chase's lifeline, and his double-edged sword. He never read that part. The next day at 9 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then picked up. "Lauren? It's me, Raymond." I was speechless. "I stopped by the office this morning. Chase said you resigned?" Number. He fired me. A pause. I could feel him trying to keep his composure on the other end of the line. Jesus! He was going to sign with Avalora today. Exactly, at 11 a.m., but you know the terms. Raymond gritted his teeth. "He has no authority. He can't sign without you." I was silent. "Lauren," Raymond said slowly, each word weighing down. "Chase just blew a $40 million deal. I'm not going to let this go." I hung up. Then I looked out the window. A light rain began to fall. And I knew. The game was on. After the call with Raymond, I did nothing in a hurry. I didn't post anything on LinkedIn. I didn't complain to my friends. I didn't tell Facebook that I was fired. I just disappeared from the radar. To Chase, I might have been a deleted file. But to me, that was when the pieces began to fall into place. I started where I was most familiar, the Avalora contract. I'd lived with it for almost a year, every draft, every edit. They were a demanding but extremely disciplined client. Any little mistake could derail any deal. And I knew one thing for sure. Avalora would never sign anything without me present. That afternoon, I drove to my old coffee shop near my house, the place I used to work whenever I wanted to get away from the office. I opened my laptop and accessed my personal folder, which contained all my documents from the previous years. I was a careful person, so I always kept a copy of every major contract. Not because I was afraid, but because I had seen many a company go bust when no one had the original documents. And this time, it was my carefulness that kept me in the game that Chase thought was over. I reviewed each draft. Clause 18.3 was unchanged. And more importantly, Avalora had signed a statement that they would only negotiate with me or someone I had authorized, which meant that any signature from Chase was not legally binding. The next morning, I called Mara Lynn, Avalora's vice president of legal affairs, the person I had been working with all this time. "Lauren, I heard something about you. What's going on?" she said as soon as she picked up. "I've left Prescott and Bloom," I said bluntly, involuntarily. "What?" "Chase fired me. No notice, no reason, and now I hear he's about to sign the contract today." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Wait," Mara said. "Chase hasn't contacted me. I thought you were still running this." Number. But I have to ask, Avalora is still bound by the legal representation clause, right? Exactly. And without your signature, or a formal letter of authorization from you, we can't sign anything. I let out a sigh of relief. Mara continued, her voice growing sharper. "I'm canceling my meeting with Chase immediately, and I'm sending a formal email to the entire Prescott and Bloom team." Less than 30 minutes later, my phone started ringing incessantly. The first number was from my old company's legal department. I didn't answer. The second was Chase. I let it ring to voicemail. Not long after, the first message came in. "Lauren, there seems to be a misunderstanding about the other day. Could you call me back?" 2 minutes later. "I need your help just this one time. For the good of the company. Looking forward to hearing from you soon." And then, "I need to see you. Urgent. Call me back." I didn't answer. Instead, I sat there in the little coffee shop, sipping a cappuccino and looking out the window. Everything seemed to slow down, but inside me, everything was already mapped out. Chase didn't know who I'd been seeing, didn't know that I'd emailed the board, attached a scan of Clause 18.3, and all the correspondence between me and Avalora from the past few months. I didn't say he was wrong. I didn't attack. I just sent the facts and let the numbers, the signatures, the legalities tell the story. And just a few hours later, the corporate headquarters was in crisis. At 4 p.m., Chase called one last time. I picked up this time because I knew he was panicking. "Lauren, I know you're mad, but you can't do that to the company. You were part of it, right?" I chuckled. "Yes, but you're forgetting what part I am. I'm not just an employee." Silence. "Do you know how much money you just lost, Chase? Avalora didn't just terminate the contract. They're considering taking it to court because you used the negotiation data without authorization." Chase mumbled something, but I didn't care. "I didn't do anything, Chase. I just kept quiet and let Clause 18.3 do its thing." The next day, I got another call from Raymond. "He's suspended. The board is calling an emergency meeting in the next 48 hours. Will you be there?" I was quiet for a moment. I'm no longer an employee. Number, but you know this firm better than anyone. I thought for a moment. Then I nodded. "I'll be there." 3 days after my last call, Chase continued to act as if nothing had happened. I knew, because I still had insiders reporting back. The people who had worked under me, people I'd mentored when they were interns, hadn't betrayed me. On the contrary, they saw clearly who was really holding the firm together. Chase still walked around the office like a star. White button-down shirt, shiny leather shoes, drinking his morning latte with almond milk from a silver thermos. He even gave an interview to a local business magazine, with a headline that sounded like he'd just saved the American economy. Chase Prescott, reinventing the law industry with young leadership. In the article, he cited the Avalora deal as a prime example of new age leadership. He said he was the one who brought bold vision, moving Prescott and Bloom closer to global standards. I don't know whether to laugh or feel sorry. Meanwhile, Avalora has officially sent a legal notice demanding that Prescott and Bloom explain its improper negotiation, unauthorized use of information, and violation of a high-level confidentiality agreement. The document was sent directly to the legal department. C said to the entire board, "This is no longer a slap. This is a direct knockout blow." On Wednesday morning, I received an email from Raymond. "Lauren, the board meeting is on Friday, 10 a.m. I have proposed that you be a special advisor to the meeting." They agreed. All the senior staff and Avalora representatives will be there via Zoom. Get everything you need. I'm on your side. I read the "I'm on your side" line 3 times. Then I opened a Google Drive file and created a new folder. Response vertical bar P and B dot. I put in the entire email chain with Avalora, the official contract with clause 18.3, the notes from the 7-month negotiation, and screenshots of Chase's interview. Friday came faster than I thought. I wore a white shirt, my hair pulled back into a bun, and walked into the Prescott and Bloom building as if I had never left. The security guard nodded to me, without asking my name. It was the same guy, Paul, who I had helped arrange time to care for my terminally ill daughter. "Welcome home," he said softly. I squeezed his hand. No words were needed. The 22nd floor conference room was hushed. Everyone was there. Raymond stood at the head of the table, stoic. To his right were the 3 board members. To his left was Chase, who looked like he hadn't slept for 3 nights in a row. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie askew, his lips dry. "Lauren," Raymond said, "please begin." I opened my laptop and plugged it into the big screen. A single slide appeared. Clause 18.3, potential legal consequences and damages. I didn't say much. I just laid out the facts. I talked about how the Avalora contract was designed, the emphasis on the individual negotiating the deal. I showed the document that listed me as the only person legally authorized to sign. Then I showed an email from Mara Lynn, Avalora's vice president, confirming that Chase's attempt to sign without me was a breach of contract. Finally, I opened the attachment. Avalora's $7.5 million claim for breach of trust and breach of confidentiality. It was legally stamped. The room fell silent. A board member asked, "What do you have to say, Chase?" Chase opened his mouth. His tongue was dry. I didn't know that clause existed." Raymond sat still. Then he chuckled, a laugh that was both heartbreaking and disappointing. "You don't know because you never read the last page." Chase bowed his head. "I just want to do it right." "You didn't listen to anyone," Raymond interrupted, his voice hard. "You cut the foundation of this company. You signed something you didn't understand. And now, the whole organization is suffering." The meeting lasted another hour. Finally, the board made a decision. Chase Prescott is suspended indefinitely. All executive authority will be temporarily transferred to the advisory board, which includes Raymond Prescott and Lauren Mitchell. I didn't cry. I didn't gloat. I just nodded, because that's how it should be. The board meeting had barely ended 2 hours when I received another call from Raymond. But this time, he was no longer as calm as before. His voice was hoarse, urgent, as if he had just run a marathon in the company hallway. "Lauren? It's me. What's going on? Chase just told me you quit?" I held back a sigh, trying to keep my voice calm. "Not really, Raymond. I was fired. No notice, no reason, just an order from your son." There was silence on the other end of the line for a few seconds. I thought he had hung up until I heard him slam his fist on the wooden table. "My God! Lauren, he doesn't know. He doesn't know about Clause 18.3. Avalora wouldn't have signed without you." I chuckled, though my heart was bitter. Exactly. And he didn't check. Didn't ask anyone. Just jumped in and signed. Took pictures. Sent them to the press. And thought he was a hero. Raymond hissed. He just called me and said everything was under control. I felt something was wrong, so I called you. And now, my God, the company is about to lose Avalora. His voice trailed off, choking. I shouldn't have let him take over so soon. It was my fault. For the first time in 12 years, I heard Raymond's voice tremble. I didn't blame him. I knew Raymond was a man of principle. He loved his son, but he also loved the company like a second child. And now, as they collided like two trains running in opposite directions, he could only stand there, helpless. Lauren. He lowered his voice. I know I have no right to ask for anything after all, but I will ask. Can you come back? Not for me, but for the company. For all the people you've mentored. And for yourself. I was speechless. Not because of the question, but because of the sincerity in each syllable. There are moments in this world when you understand that you don't need to shout and don't need to retaliate with anger or bitter revenge. You just need to stand still. Let the truth speak for itself. And Raymond, the one who saw the potential in me first, was hearing that voice more clearly than anyone else. I'll come back, I said, but I have conditions. Raymond didn't interrupt. I won't come back as Chase's subordinate. I won't be the foil for an emergency patch. If I come back, I want independent control for the rest of the Avalora project. No interference, no approvals, no oversight. Raymond answered without thinking. Okay. I'll reconvene the board, sign the papers today. You'll have full authority. I went back to the office that weekend. Not by the back door. I walked in through the main entrance, as direct and confident as I had been 10 years ago, when I was a new hire, carrying a file box and a trembling dream. But this time, I wasn't coming back to start. I was coming back to take control. Chase wasn't in the office that morning. He was reportedly on emergency leave for medical reasons. I didn't ask. I didn't need to see him. He was no longer in this game. Raymond personally showed me into my new office, no longer the small, cramped office downstairs. This was the main executive suite where Chase had sat. This room has been yours for a long time. I just helped turn the keys over at the right time. I smiled. Thank you, Raymond, but I didn't come back for the chair. I know. He nodded. You came back for the value. On my first day back, I didn't do anything big. I just sat down at my desk, turned on my computer, and sent a single email to the entire company. Subject: back. And we have work to do. Hi everyone, I'm Lauren Mitchell. You may have heard of me. You may not have worked directly with me, but if you believed that Prescott and Bloom was a proud organization, we had something in common. I was back, and I wasn't here to save anyone. I was here to right a wrong. Who would join me in rebuilding trust? The conference room opens at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Bring your honesty and a strong cup of coffee. Lauren. Point 8. After the email I sent that morning, less than 15 minutes later, my phone started ringing. First the legal department, then the accounting department, then the operations manager. All in the same tone, rushed, urgent, filled with a mixture of fear and pleading. Lauren, we need you to confirm your rights to process the Avalora documents. Could you explain Clause 18.3 to the admin team? Avalora has requested a face-to-face meeting with you. Urgent. I didn't answer. I let the phone ring silently, like a cacophony of panic. Then it was Chase's turn. The first call I didn't pick up. The second I declined. The third, he left a voicemail. I listened as I poured myself a cup of tea. His voice was shaky, urgent, as if he was trying to hold on to something he knew had slipped through his fingers. Lauren, if there was any misunderstanding, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have handled it that way. Can you come back? Just to finish this project, for everyone. I stood in my small kitchen, a cup of hot tea in my hand, and I laughed. Not because of the earnestness in his voice, but because now I had a choice, and I did. At 9 a.m. the next morning, true to my word, I walked into the company's large conference room. There were nearly 30 employees present, many of them former subordinates, colleagues, even new faces who had never worked with me. But they all fell silent and listened. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to give a Chase speech. I just spoke the truth. We lost trust, not because of a flaw in our process, but because we let someone lead us who didn't understand our people, our culture, and our values. But the worst part wasn't that he existed, it was that we let him. The room was silent. I continued. I'm not here to criticize. I'm here to fix what's worth saving. And if you want to join me in saving this company, starting with Avalora, I need you to be focused, honest, and willing to start over. No one said anything. Then one person clapped, then another. Then the entire room stood and applauded. I didn't cry. But my heart warmed. That afternoon, I was in a Zoom meeting with Avalora's executive team. Mara Lynn, their general counsel, looked at me through the screen with a mixture of surprise and relief. Lauren, it's good to see you back. I nodded. This time, I'll be the one to sign. The meeting lasted 2 hours. We went over the terms, clarified all the facts, and confirmed that everything Chase had presented would be completely void. At the end, Mara looked at me. So, we go back to the old agreement, with a stricter confidentiality clause? Exactly. I nodded. And I'll be the one in charge until the contract closes. Deal. She smiled. When I walked out of the meeting, Raymond was waiting. No words. He just raised his hand and shook mine firmly. You saved the company. I replied with a steady gaze. No. I only saved what deserved to exist. That afternoon, the board held an extraordinary meeting. Chase was asked to address the entire board, in a state of no longer being an executive. He sat there, head down, eyes confused. A board member asked, "Do you realize the consequences of negotiating contracts and providing false information?" Chase mumbled, I just think people are too rigid. Another interrupted, rigidity doesn't expose the company to a $7 million lawsuit. Irresponsibility does. After nearly 40 minutes of questioning, the final decision was made. Chase Prescott is hereby removed from his position. He is no longer authorized to represent or participate in any executive activities of Prescott and Bloom for an indefinite period of time. That evening, I was alone in my new office. I looked out at the city of Chicago through the large glass windows. Everything was the same, the cars, the lights, the skyscrapers, but inside me, something had quietly changed. I didn't need anyone to acknowledge this victory, because this wasn't a victory. This was an affirmation. I had been ignored. I had been dismissed without mercy. But I didn't need to scream in retaliation. I just needed to stay in my place. That night, when everyone had gone home, I was still sitting alone in my office, the light from my monitor reflecting off the window glass. Outside, the streets of Chicago were still awake, and inside, I felt quieter than ever. Not the kind of peace that comes from successful revenge, but the kind of peace that comes from knowing you did the right thing, and did it in a way that not everyone has the courage to choose. I pulled open a drawer and took out a small USB drive. On it were a series of internal documents from 5 years ago. A time when the company was on the brink of crisis. A time when almost no one remembered. At that time, Prescott and Bloom had just lost a major client, the technology company Virion, because of a scandal involving the sharing of sensitive data. The result was more than $3 million in contracts that disappeared overnight, and our reputation was tarnished. But what nearly brought the company down wasn't the scandal itself, but Chase's handling of the crisis. He wasn't CEO yet. He was just a special projects manager. a position Raymond had created to help his son learn. And Chase, eager to prove his worth, had directed his legal team to erase internal data related to Virion, hoping to bury the past. I learned about this by accident in a misdirected email. I didn't report him. I didn't make a fuss. I just quietly backed up all that data and reported it to Raymond in a thorough, unsentimental analysis. And with the evidence I provided, Raymond was able to prove to his partner that the fault lay with Virion, not us, thereby saving some of his reputation and potential customers. The next day, I held a small meeting with the middle management. I opened the slides, but not the usual revenue data or KPI charts. Instead, I shared a story from 5 years ago, something no one had heard. Have you ever wondered why, while other companies collapsed after a major scandal, we survived and even thrived? The room was silent. Because that year, someone deleted the evidence that could have saved us, and someone else kept it. Not to criticize, not to take credit, but to make sure that if someone made a mistake, someone would fix it. I didn't have to name names. They knew. A hand went up. It was Josh, the head of accounting. Ms. Mitchell, why didn't you say so sooner? I smiled, gently. Because if I did, Chase would have been eliminated 5 years ago. But I believe that everyone deserves a chance to learn how to grow. It's just a pity. Not everyone knows how to use the opportunity properly. There was no applause that day. No one shouted, "Bravo." But there were eyes that looked at me that changed. Not pitying looks like, "Oh, she finally won," but looks of deep respect. It turns out this woman has been standing on the front lines all these years, silently protecting the Prescott and Bloom name without anyone knowing. Late in the afternoon, I received an email from Raymond. "Lauren, I've reread the entire report you sent that year. I owe you an apology for not acting sooner. And I also owe you a thank you for never doing anything to hurt the company, even though you had the power. If you're willing, I'd like to propose a change. A new leadership structure, where she leads, with full control over who will be in charge." I looked at the words, my fingers stopping on the keyboard. Not because I was surprised, but because I realized this is a moment of choice. I can take charge. I can change everything. But I don't want to stay. That evening, I typed a reply. "Raymond, thank you for the invitation and the trust. I appreciate it, but I think it's time for me to move on. Prescott and Bloom has always been my home, but now I don't want to be a roofer anymore. I want to build a new home, one where human dignity is never compromised by age, gender, or generational bias. And if one day my former colleagues want to build it with me, the door is always open. Sincerely, Lauren." The next morning, I left the office for the last time. No fuss, no waving, just a small USB drive in my pocket, a neat folder in my hand, and a small smile. Chase had lost everything. His title, his reputation, his opportunities. I did nothing to take that away. I just kept quiet and let the truth speak. 3 weeks after I left Prescott and Bloom for the second time, this time, proactively, I got a flurry of emails and text messages from familiar names. Not whining, not begging, but offers. An offer to be senior counsel at a New York law firm. An offer to be on the board of a women's investment fund. An offer to teach part-time at a prestigious business school. And then came the unexpected names, former clients, former partners, even some of the associates who had supported Chase in the past, all apologizing. They said they didn't see what I saw. They said, "Now we understand why you've been the one to keep Prescott and Bloom going all these years." I read every word. I didn't blame anyone. I didn't mock anyone. I just thought, things happen when they're supposed to happen. And Chase? I heard he left Chicago. Some said he went to Florida looking for a way to start over. Others said he was living on Raymond's welfare. I didn't care. Not because I hated him, but because I didn't have to care anymore. That was the biggest victory. Not seeing the wronged person on his knees, but realizing that I had stepped out of the cycle of having to prove myself. One afternoon, I received a text from Josh, the head of accounting. Ms. Mitchell, some of the old team are looking to do something different. We're thinking about starting our own company, small. Do it right. Clean. No chasing KPIs, no toxic culture. Would you be willing to mentor us? I smiled. My heart fluttered, just like the first day I walked into the Prescott and Bloom office, carrying a small but steadfast dream. Do good work. Turn value into something truly valuable. I texted back, what do you call it? Number, any suggestions? I paused, then typed, Verity Legal. Verity means truth? Yeah, because without truth, the law is just an empty shell. And so I began a new journey. No longer a manager, no longer someone who had to prove his ability to anyone. I became someone who rebuilt trust from scratch, with young people who understood the true value of a handshake, a promise, and a signature that carried weight. One day, while sitting at my usual coffee shop, I saw a familiar face walk in. Raymond. He was a little older. His hair was grayer than the last time I saw him, but his eyes were the same. Deep, alert, and sad. He saw me, nodded. I nodded back. He sat down at my table. No need to invite me. No need to say anything right away. Only after a while did he speak softly. Thank you. For not embarrassing me in front of the board. For not using that moment to humiliate my son. I rested my arms on the table. I don't have to, Raymond. He did it himself. He nodded, his eyes distant. I was wrong to think my son could learn everything I didn't teach him. But maybe there are some things you can only learn by falling hard. I looked at him, gently. Everyone falls. The thing is, some people get back up. Some people don't. Before he stood up, he left a small card. If you need anything, support, a recommendation, or even just a name to vouch, forgive me this. I picked up the card. His name was printed on the front. On the back was a neat handwriting. The person I trusted most throughout my career, Lauren Mitchell. I folded the card and put it in my wallet. Not to use it, just to remind myself that when you live right, you don't need to shout. Fame will find you. A year later, Verity Legal had 12 employees, 3 small offices, and a client list that was growing every month. We didn't sign million-dollar contracts. We didn't make the news. But every week, we received thank you notes from small businesses and individuals who had been stifled by the big system. Thanks to us, they got their justice. And I knew. This was what I should have been doing all along. Not power. Not the highest office. Not revenge. But doing the right thing. And doing enough. I often think back to the day Chase fired me. With a cold sentence. Without warning. Without a shred of respect. Strangely, what seemed like the most painful fall of my career turned out to be the turning point that made me stronger than ever. I didn't fight. I didn't curse. I didn't sue. I just stood up, shut up, and let the truth speak for itself. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't to shout louder than the person who offended you. It's to live, work, and succeed in a way that makes it impossible for them to ignore you. The day I left Prescott and Bloom for the second time, I took one thing with me. Not a title, not a bonus, but my worth. Something that no one can fire and no one can replace. And if you're watching this, you've probably been in the same position I was in. Being overlooked, dismissed, misjudged. If so, I want to say this. You don't have to prove your worth to people who choose not to see it. You just have to keep moving forward, because eventually, your worth will speak for itself. Mouse. Don't let anyone decide who you are just because they're sitting in a higher position. Position can be bought, but dignity cannot. Some falls are not failures, but invitations to step onto a more worthy path. And finally, the smartest revenge is when you don't need to retaliate, because they destroy themselves. Have you ever experienced something similar? A turning point in your life where you thought you were the loser but left as the winner? Comment below and let me know which city you're watching from. I always read everything. If you like this kind of revenge but full of humanity story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next episodes. See you in another story, another journey, where justice doesn't come from strength, but from kindness that never wavers.